All Things Jira, and I'm back with another story. So today's story is about a group of Russian scientists. Now, these scientists were experimenting with an airborne stimulant, and they were using this stimulant to attempt to eliminate the need for sleep in humans, specifically for their soldiers, trying to keep their soldiers awake longer. This story takes place sometime after World War II. I'm not sure exactly what year it was. So apparently the Germans had experimented with a methamphetamine of some sort for the same reason, and so did America and Britain. They were all using these things to attempt to keep their soldiers awake longer, hoping to have more success in war. So like I said, this was sometime after World War II. So they used 5 POWs, and the goal was to experiment on them using this gas, and the goal was to keep them awake for 15 days. They told the subjects that they were going to free them after the experiment was over. So they sealed the subjects in a chamber. Now in this chamber, they had one small window. They had books, they had chairs, they had food, water, a toilet. They had blankets, but they didn't have any beds. Also in the chamber, like I said, there was one small window, but they also had microphones all over the chamber so that researchers could monitor the subjects during this experiment. They didn't have CCTV. They didn't have cameras like we have now, but they were able to use microphones in that very small window to monitor them. So as I said, the chamber was sealed. So they pumped in the gas along with oxygen. So they said the first 5 days of the experiment were uneventful. Nothing really happened. The subjects were just in there reading, getting to know each other, having like light conversations. Now to me, that seemed odd because after a few days of no sleep, most people are pretty irritable. So just being able to have an uneventful first 5 days of not sleeping at all just seemed a little strange to me. So they said sometime into day 5, their conversation started to get a little darker. It was still pretty uneventful, but they were starting to tell their war stories. So what they went through during the war and being captured and that type of thing. Then they started talking about having these reoccurring nightmares about their capture and what they went through during the war. Now on day 6, they started to complain to each other about being in this experiment. They started to complain, saying that the conditions of that chamber they were in were worse than being in war. They all started to seem pretty confused around day 6, and they started to become very suspicious of each other. So I read a few stories that said they would go over to the microphones and start to tell things on each other. Most of the things they were telling were made up, but they were hoping they would be able to give the researchers some information about the other subjects in the experiment and hopefully be freed based on whatever information they gave. But they started to tell stories to the microphones about the other subjects. So the researchers, they concluded that they were only becoming suspicious of each other because of the gas that was pumped in. They concluded that it had nothing to do with their lack of sleep for 6 days. So all that went on for the next few days, but on day 9, one subject began screaming and he didn't stop for 3 hours. So after about 3 hours of screaming continuously, he just stopped. Now later on, they realized that the only reason he stopped screaming was because he tore his vocal cords. Now they said it was because he screamed continuously for 3 hours, but I'm not really sure if you can do that. I'm not sure if that's possible or not. So while that subject was screaming for 3 hours, the other subjects started to whisper to each other. They couldn't really tell what they were saying, but they went and grabbed the books. They started to rip pages out of the books, and they used water and their feces to take the pages and stick them onto the walls and to cover that small window that they had. So the researchers were able to hear what was going on in the room, but they weren't able to see anything through that small window anymore. Now when the screaming stopped, the whispering stopped as well. Now for 3 days, the researchers could not see into the room because they had covered that window with the pages of the book. They also couldn't hear anything. So initially they thought maybe something was going on with the microphones, but they did check the microphones and they were working properly. It was just because all of the subjects had stopped speaking, and it seemed like they weren't even really moving around the chamber as much either. So now the researchers started to get really worried about what was going on in there. So they decided to go down to the chamber. So they go down to the chamber to check on the subjects. When they get down there, they speak to the subjects through the door and they tell them that they're going to unlock the door, but if any of them tries to do anything, that they're going to shoot them. They also told the subjects that they would free them as long as they all followed their orders. So when the researchers said this to the subject, that they were going to free them as long as they follow orders, one subject said, and he said this really calmly, "We no longer want to be freed." After the researchers heard them speak, and they heard him say they didn't want to be freed any longer, they decided not to open the door at all. And they would continue on with the experiment. So the subjects stayed silent up until day 15. On day 15, the researchers decided that they were going to open the door to the chamber at midnight. So during the day, on that 15th day, they stopped pumping the stimulant into the room and just pumped pure oxygen into the room. So at midnight, they go down to the chamber to open the doors. When they got down there and opened the door, the subjects started to scream again. All of them started to scream. When the researchers went into the chamber, everything was a mess. There was stuff everywhere, and they realized only 4 of the subjects were alive. One subject was laying on the floor, dead, and he had bits and pieces of him missing: his skin, his muscles, primarily on his arms, his legs, and his face. When they looked around at the other subjects, they also had skin and muscle tissue missing from their faces and arms. And the researchers determined that they had done this to themselves, and that they had begun eating pieces of their own skin and their own muscles. And they hadn't touched any of the food that was in the chamber for them over the past several days. So it seems like they had been living on their own tissue. So the researchers tried to explain to them that the experiment was over and they needed to get medical attention for these pieces of tissue and muscle that were missing from them. But the subjects did not want to leave the room. They refused and they put up a fight. So the researchers actually had to call soldiers to come into the room and get the subjects out. When the soldiers went in to get the subjects out, there was a fight. One of the subjects got hurt and he bled to death. So there were only 3 subjects left now. The 3 prisoners that were left were taken to the hospital to have their wounds and injuries looked at. When they got to the hospital, they determined that all 3 subjects needed surgery. So because they had been pumped with this stimulant for the past 15 days, they weren't able to put any of the subjects to sleep to do surgery on them. So the subjects were awake during these surgeries. One particular subject, they said the whole time that they were doing surgery on him, he was yelling, "Keep cutting, keep cutting." That is so creepy. They said the other 2 subjects laughed throughout their whole surgeries. They took the subjects back to the research facility. They were supposed to be debriefed after the experiment was over and then freed. But when they got back there, they realized that the subjects were when they got back to the research facility, the scientists determined that the subjects were acting this way because of the withdrawal from the stimulant. They determined that they needed to give them more gas in order to calm them back down, because they were quiet for those last few days because of the stimulant that was being pumped into the chamber. So they put them back in the chamber. They started to pump the gas back into the chamber again. And one subject calmed down so much, he actually laid down to go to sleep, and he died soon after closing his eyes. So they went in to get the body of the subject that died, but when they went in, the other 2 subjects would not allow them to touch him. Another fight ensued, and one of the subjects was shot and killed. So at this point, there's only 1 subject left, and one of the researchers asked him, "What are you?" or "What is wrong with you?" And he responded by saying,
"We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into the silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal heaven, where we cannot tread."
And he was shot, and as he died, he whispered, "So nearly free." Okay, so with this story, I could not find any legitimate documents about this at all anywhere. I saw articles, newspaper clippings that I am not sure were actually even real. I've seen videos. I've heard other people tell the story. Every story had a slight difference to it. So personally, I don't believe that this story is true at all. I believe that it is possibly a story that's based on an actual experiment that was done, but this particular story didn't really make sense to me. Just from what I've seen, it seems like there was some type of contest or something asking people to write like a creepy story about wartime or about experiments or something like that. And it seems like this was a story that was submitted to that website. I've seen it in a lot of places, so I wanted to tell this story. So what do you think about the story? Do you think this is a real story? Do you think this is a true story? Or do you think that it's made up? Tell me what you think. Make sure you like this video, leave a comment, and please share. If you aren't already subscribed, please do. I'm here every Wednesday at 10:15 telling a story that I found somewhere on the internet. Some may be true, some may be fake. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys again next Wednesday. Bye.